second sikha. The parsha starts with the words, these are the things that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Eden on this side of the Yarden, and he goes on, and Midbar, Barova, different things, and then that's the introduction, the beginning of Chumash Devorim, Parsha Devorim, the Chumash Devorim. So the Rebbe says like this: in Posuk Vayiba Arboim Shana Gamer, in the Posuk where it says it was the 40 years later on, the Posuk continues, it was 40 years. The second Posuk, the third Posuk is Vayiba Arboim Shana Ba'ashta Esra Osir Chedesh Bechad LaChedesh, the 40th year, the 11th month of Chedesh, the first day. Diber Moshe of Bnei Yisrael, Chela Shetziva Hashem Eisi Aleim. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Yidden whatever Hashem said to do. So there are two pshatim here from two meforshim, two commentaries. When they say the word pashtonim, there are different kinds of commentaries. There are commentaries of drush, they're called darshonim. Then you have commentaries that bring out the halacha, they're called paskonim. And then you have pashtonim, means there's commentaries that try to explain the pshat in the posuk according to the simple pshat. So there are two meforshim, two commentaries, pashtonim, and they are two different, so to speak, opinions. What was it that Moshe said to the Yidden? The Pasuk says Moshe spoke to the Yidden what Hashem said. What does that refer to? Number one opinion is Rashi. Rashi brings it up from Sifri. Rashi brings from the Medrash, from the Sifri. That what it means is that he spoke words of rebuke, of Musar. And the Rashi says the Lashon that before Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, he gave them Musar, he gave him Techacha. And that's what the Pasuk means when it says that these are the things Moshe spoke to the Eden. He spoke Divrei Techacha, words of rebuke. The second pshat is the Sapurna. The Sapurna Zok. He learns like this: that Moshe Rabbeinu repeated to them the whole Torah, everything that was said till now. So when the Torah says that Moshe spoke to the Eden, everything that he was supposed to say, that David said to say, so the Sapurna learns it goes that the fact that he repeated the whole Torah. And the Rebbe says these two Perushim, I need to these two commentaries don't contradict each other. They're not arguing really. They're both true. They're both there. In Sefer Devorim, in Sefer Devorim, we find words of rebuke. And also the whole Torah was reviewed. Actually, the name of Chumash Devorim is Mishnah Torah. It means it's a review of the whole Torah. So then what is the argument? We know that it has both. So the difference between these two commentaries is, what is mer ba'ad goshe? What's more stressed? Or the nochmer, or more, what is merike? What is the main thing? In other words, both things were there. Rashi learns the main purpose was to give techacha, and according to the supporter, the main purpose was to chazer over the Torah, but they both agreed that they were both there. So the Rebbe says, but we have to understand, the Baldas Diber Moshe Gamer, Yeta from ganze Sefer Devorim, since it starts here by saying that Moshe spoke to the Eden, it goes on the whole Chumash Devorim, and in the whole Chumash Devorim we find both. We find words of Tichach and we find the review of the whole Torah. So we have to say that both of these two things, number one, Divrei Tichach, the rebuke, and Mishnah Torah, the review of the Torah, is Kol Zem they're one included in the other, or the Raziyom Ateichen Meshutah, where they have a common denominator, which means like this. Since one says the main thing was the Tichacha, Rashi says the main thing is the Tichacha. But Rashi also knows that there were words of Chazara, review of the Torah. The supporter says the main thing is the review of the Torah, but he also knows that there were Tichacha. And since there's one introduction to both, so no matter which way we learn, we have to say it includes both. You have to say that even if the Iker is Techacha, but the Techacha is also connected and has the same idea as Chazara and the Torah. If you learn the main thing is the Chazara, the review of the Torah, it concludes in its dinyan of Techacha. So we have to say that. So what's the question here? So really the question is, how is it? How do we see that the words of Techacha include the Chazara of the Torah, the review of the Torah? How do we see that the review of the Torah also includes the Techacha? So the Rebbe doesn't say those words. He says, we have to understand, since they're both a Iker, we know they're both the Iker, so there must be each one contains the other, and the question will be, how? Or maybe you could learn another pshat here in the Sikha, that the Rebbe is not asking a question, he's just giving an introduction, what he's going to try to explain later, and he says, that we have to understand, doesn't mean I have a kasha. It's like saying, This must lead us to understand that since they argue which one is the Ikea, but they're both true, and both are hinted in the words Diber Meishel Kol Yisrael, so that gives us to understand. So we have to understand that there's both. And now the Rebbe is going to explain a whole Akdama till he gets to the end to show how the Divrei Techoche and the Chazor and the Torah really go together, and it's really one, and therefore the machlokes between them is really not a real machlokes. So the Rebbe goes into explaining what is the whole idea of Chumash Dvorim. The chilek zwischen the erste vier Svarim and Sefer Dvorim, the difference between the first four Chumoshim and the last one, Sefer Dvorim, Zog the Gemara. The Gemara says, the vier Svarim seid mit Piagvura, the first four came from the Eibishter, from the mouth of the Eibishter. Und Mishnah Torah and Chumash Dvorim, which is called Mishnah Torah, hat Moshe gesagt mit Piatzmei. Said it on his own. What does that mean? The Pshat from Piatzmei, the Rebbe explains, don't think, when we say it, he said it on his own, is nicht as Mishnah Torah hat Moshe chas v'sholem gesagt für sich allein, seine eigene Rede. It doesn't mean chas v'sholem, Moshe said his own things. It's his own words. It's not from the Eibishter, chas v'sholem. Actually, in Orah 7, the Rebbe brings what the Rambam says, that any person that says one letter of the Torah is Moshe said on his own, not from the Eibishter, is a kafir of the Torah, denies in the Torah. So you can't say that the whole Chumash is said on his own. Even if you say on one letter of all five Chumoshim, including the last one, that Moshe said it on his own. So what does the Gemara mean that Moshe said it on his own? Norvi Rashi das Masber Bakamacha. Rashi in a different place explains it. Gemara is on Hedrin. That means Moshe Rab Me'elav Yishen al Mishnah Torah. Moshe didn't teach him Mishnah Torah on his own. He had told them over what he received. And he repeated to them what he heard from the Eibishter. Whatever it says in the Aseres Adibris, where it's repeated second time, which is in Parashat Baschana, which is in Chumash Dvorim, that was also written in the Luchas, and these are the words he heard from Sinai. That means that Moshe did not say it on his own. So Rashi says clearly, when it says Moshe on his own, it doesn't mean he said his own things. He said only what David said. He repeated what David said. Und mit Teiste sagt dass das Moshe am Ya'at mi Amram is given Ruach HaKodesh. Teiste says Moshe said on his own, but it was Ruach HaKodesh. So he's mit Muppen, so we don't understand what that means. The Baal, as ich Mishnah Torah hat Moshe nicht gesagt, nicht seine Wörter, even since we're saying now that even Moshe didn't say his own words, nor hat es gesagt, Ruach HaKodesh, he said it with Ruach HaKodesh, like the Lashon Shechina with Aberes and Techgrena, he spoke it. But the Shechina David was talking from his throat, was the far hat gesagt from the Sati Motor. That's why if you look in the Krishma, which is in Parashat Vaschana, Parashat Ekev, so there he said, I will give you rain. If you listen to the Torah, I will give you rain. What do you mean, I will give you rain? If Moshe Rabbeinu said this on his own, so he's speaking, he's saying, I will give you rain. Moshe Rabbeinu gives rain. The answer is, when Moshe was speaking, what is David speaking from within him? The Spirit of Hashem was speaking. So when he said, I will give it, was David saying. So if also Chumash Dvorim, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it on his own, it's all saying go over from David, it was all David speaking through him. So the question is, why is it called Piyaz? What is the meaning that he said on his own? When we know for sure it doesn't mean simply that he said it on his own. The Zelba Shaila is Eichad Dem, the Gemara Zog, a similar Shaila, a similar question on something the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says in Baruch Gomes, as I feel Mandomet lay Dorish smoking Baalme the Mishnah Torah Dorish. You know that one of the ways that we darshan psukim in the Torah, so according to one opinion, we darshan smuchim. If we have in the Torah two dinim, two separate dinim written next to each other, samuch means close, that's to teach us that we have to learn out certain details from one of the dinim on the other. That's called vidarshan smuchim. Vidarshan that the Torah made two dinim close to each other. It's to teach us a certain din. That's one opinion. Another opinion says, no, we don't darshan. That's not one of the way to darshan the Torah. But nevertheless, the Gemara says that even that opinion that says we don't darshan smuchim, but in Mishnah Torah, in Chumash Dvorim, we do darshan smuchim. That if there are two dinim next to each other in Chumash Dvorim, everyone agrees that we darshan a drash, why one is close to the other to teach us certain din. What's the reason, Take? And the Raven is Masber. One of the Rishonim, the Raven explains why. The time, the reason is, Mishum the Kol HaTorah and Piagvura Nemra. The whole Torah was set from the Eibishter. Ve'im Mugdam Mucher. So mainly you can't say that one, it doesn't follow the chronological way, because when the Eibishter said the Torah, he had it all spiritual, different ideas there. So the fact that one is closer to the other, not closer. The fact that the order of the way the things are written is not necessarily the same way it happened. It's not according to the sequence of time. Why? Because David had all kinds of ideas how to write the Torah. So we can't say that one comes before the other is because there's a special reason why they're close. There are other reasons David had. But Mishnah Torah that Moshe said, Parsha after Parsha, when he established that he set it up, one Parsha after the other, he did it in order to darshan it, which means like this. Moshe Rabbeinu was a human being. So when Moshe set up the order of the Torah, it's something that is left for us to darshan, because Moshe, he was a tzaddik, but he was still a human being. So we human beings could figure out what the reason was. So Moshe made it in a way that it should have a hemshech, and Mela we have to learn. But in the other Chumashim, this opinion holds, David had a different cheshbonos. We don't know. So it's not because these two have to teach each other. David has other cheshbonos. But what does it mean here? So according to the Raven, it means that Moshe Rabbeinu set up Chumash Devorim on his own. And therefore, we could darshan it because we're also human beings and we could darshan like him. He's in the Eichendemic movements. Here it's also not understood. Well, that Mishnah Torah Moshe Gzog Baruch HaKodesh, before we said that he didn't say it on his own. He said it Baruch HaKodesh, which means the Eibishter was saying it through him. So why do we say that the order, the way things were written in Chumash Devorim, that depends on Moshe because he decided how to do it? It's not true. I think in the Ershe first Devorim, but in the first four Devorim was einen Eich übergegeben geworden zu ihnen durch Moshe Rabbeinu. That the other Devorim were saying was also Moshe Rabbeinu gave it to us. But there we say it's the Eibishter. Maybe the order is not for us to understand. But in Chumash Devorim, it was Moshe's own. How do we say Moshe's own? It's not his own. Moshe said it. When Moshe was saying it, was the Eibishter speaking from him. As Taisa says, as Rasha said. So in other words, we're trying to understand what does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu said Chumash Devorim vipi atzmei, his own, and basically to understand what is the difference as far as the Eibishter giving us the Torah between the first four Svarim, first four Chumashim, and Chumash Devorim. The Bir in them explanation is like this. Chazal sagen alpayim shonot kodem Torah le'olam. The Chazal tell us that the Torah came 2,000 years before the world. Was kodma meint nit nor as man. When it says here before the world, doesn't mean only in time. It was there before, in time, the world was created. Nor be'ikir ma'ila b'chshivas. It means in madrege, in importance. It's much, much higher than the world. It's beyond the way the world is. Torah mitzad atzma is in ganzen hecher from world. Torah on its own is beyond, completely beyond the world. Torah is Deibish's chochma. It's beyond the world. Und der River, so therefore, kedei Torah soll aufkommen in the world. In order for Torah to come to the world, Deibish's gave us the Torah. So he brought the Torah down to the world. Muss es sein durch Hamamutze. It has to go through intermediate. Was hot is sich beiden Yonim. It has to have both sides. It is hecher from world, has to be something which is beyond the world. And that is in the world, but on the other hand is in the world. The Farkan is in Mechabas, and that's why you could connect it. And this is something that we learn in Chassidus, but also in other Svarim, that there are certain things, two things which are Be'ein Areich, something that's completely beyond the other thing. And if the one that's Be'ein Areich wants to give something to the one that's completely beyond, in other words, he is completely beyond the second thing, you have to have something like a link in the chain that should connect both sides. And the link in between the higher and the lower has to be something that's within the level of the higher and within the level of the lower. Because if the intermediate is basically similar to the higher one, so how could that connect you to the lower one? Just like the higher thing itself can't connect to the lower one, the link is just as bad. I mean, just the same problem. If the link is something that is part of the lower one, so again, how could that connect the higher to the lower? And the link itself is Be'ein Areich to the higher one. So the only way you can do it is if you have a link of something that has both. It's part of the higher one and also has within the lower one. So that's something that could connect the higher to the lower. So here too, since the Torah is completely beyond the world, but the Torah has to connect to the world. David should give the Torah to the world. So in order for the Torah to be able to come to the world, there had to be a link in between that should have both. The link is something that is like within the level of the higher and also within the level of the lower, and therefore it could connect. And in this case, it would mean something that's higher in the world, so it's in the level of Torah, which is beyond the world, and in the level of the world, and therefore it could connect. What is it? Der Mamutze zwischen Teire und Welt is Moshe Rabbeinu. So what is the thing, the link in between the Teire, which is beyond the world, and the world, is Moshe Rabbeinu. Was bei ihm ist gefunden Zweck so. By him we find both extremes. Is given betachels abitel. It was completely bottled, nullified. Nicht Metzias. But nachnumah, he said in the Chumash, he said, what am I? In other words, he was completely no Metzias of Welt. Abitel was his hecher from Welt. He was so bottled that he wasn't part of the world. He was higher. Und von der zweiten Seite ist given Schleimus am Metzias. The Metzias is not Welt. He was the most complete, perfect person within the world. See, in Ha'ara 21, the Rebbe brings here that the Rambam Pirush Shabbos says that Moshe Rabbeinu was the chosen human being. That means he was the epitome of what a human being really should be. Perfect human being. That means he was part of the world. On one hand, he was beyond the world, and he also was part of the world. And the Rebbe brings also in Ha'ara 19 that it says in the Medrash that it says Moshe was called Ish HaLikim, a godly man. What does that mean? So the Medrash says, this is the way the Medrash expresses itself. From the middle, half of him and the bottom, he was a man, and from the middle and the top, he was God. No, he wasn't God. It means he had these two inyonim. He had shaykhs beyond the world and part in the world. Where do we see he was part of the world? He was very tall. You want to show how strong he was. The worldly things was very strong by him. He was very tall. Eser amas. The Gemara says he was 10 amas high. Imagine how high that is. But Asach Mervi, the Shir came much higher than the regular size of a person, which is 3 amas, Gimel amas. An amma in our numbers is, some say it's like 18 inches, 1.5 feet. Some say it's 2 feet. So at least it was 15 feet high, tall. Gashmi is tall. So that means that Moshe Rabbeinu was the holy person, his godly person. So he was beyond the world, and at the same time he was the perfect part of the world. And the Father was his hecher. That's why he was the one that Leib took him to bring the Torah to the Eden. He could connect. Since he was a link in between that has the union of Torah, which is higher than the world, and the world, so he could connect, bring Torah to the world. Okay. So Moshe was the one that was the mamutza. The mamutza means the intermediate in between the Torah and the world. Actually, the Pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm standing between you and the telling the Eden, and you and Hashem giving the Torah. So he's in between. He was able to take from the Torah because he was within the level of the Torah, and also bring it to the world because he was in the level of the world. Now, in that itself, there are 2 ways when a certain hashpah goes from one to another, going through an intermediate, going through a middleman, not man, a middle thing. So there are 2 levels how that happens. When you say the higher level goes through the middle and goes through the bottom side, there are 2 ways. Number one, sometimes it passes through. The hashpah wird nicht vereinzigt mit Mamutzi an Eifen von Islapshis in him. That this hashpah, this thing that you're passing down, doesn't become united with the middle and becomes part of the middle. Therefore, even though it's going through something in the middle, it doesn't make any change in what you're giving. The way the hashpah is in the higher level, it couldn't come down. So now there is like a pipe through which it goes. It doesn't change, but it couldn't come down. Now it goes through this mamutza and comes down to the bottom. The roof of mamutza is not thus. So what is the accomplishment of this mamutza, this intermediate? Was trockt of the hashpah, wie sie is von der Hecherin in der niedrige Madrege. The hashpah itself couldn't come down. So here you have, it brings it down. But what does it bring down? The same thing as it was Lamailo. The hashpah was there. It didn't change. It just comes down and passes through, because otherwise there was no way it could come. So there's like a channel through which it goes through and comes down. But what comes down? The same thing the way it was above. A second way of having a mamutza is b'derech islapshus. Islapshus means to get dressed into. The hashpah wird nicht slabisch und vereinzigt mit mamutza. The hashpah goes into the middle and becomes nislabish, becomes united with the middle one, and becomes one with him. Since it became part of the middle, and the middle is lower, so it also has a change, it becomes lower. The hashpah that you're taking becomes the level of the middle. The first way it doesn't become the level of the middle, because the middle is lower than the top. It's connected to it, but it's lower because it has a shaykhas to the lower part also. So the first way is it just passes. This way, no, it becomes part of the middle, so it becomes the level of the middle. Und durch dem können der doch die Mekabel nehmen die Ashpo, eichen seire Kliasoge. So now that happens, so the receivers are able to take this Ashpo, but they could even take it and absorb it because it became lower. The first way, it's hard for them to absorb. They take the Ashpo, the lower one, they take the Ashpo, but they can't really absorb it because it's still in the level beyond them. It happened to come through. But in this second way, it becomes part of the second. The mele, it's lower. So now the Mekablim, the receivers, are able to absorb that Ashpo because it's already not the exact same way it was before, which is Bein Areich. I always try to use a mashal. It's a stupid mashal, elementary mashal, crazy mashal, but this gives us understand the difference between an express train and a local train. An express train also goes through all the stations. It just doesn't stop there. It doesn't have anything to do with the station. It just goes through. In order to get to the bottom, to the last stop, you have to go through many stations. But local means every station it stops. Same thing with the Hashbol Mamayla. The first way is that it doesn't stop. It goes straight through and it goes down. But it doesn't change. It doesn't stop in the Madrege where it is in the middle. Maybe use another mashal, which is not exactly here. It doesn't fit, just to try to make it understand better. But the person in his brain, with his brain, could understand an idea, could understand the svara. So the brain is a kela to the svara. Then you have a person writes down an idea. So he takes a pen with his hand and writes down the svara. So the svara, which is the seichel, goes through his hand and goes onto the paper. If the hand writes the svara, it goes through. But the way the seichel goes through the hand, it doesn't become part of the hand. It goes through the derech maiver. It just, in order to come down on the paper, it goes through the hand. The way the seichel is in the brain, there it's nisacha. The brain absorbs it. It's part of the brain. Not exactly much, doesn't fit in all the details. I'm just trying to bring out the two ways. So when we said Moshe Rabbeinu is a mamutza. The Torah to come down to this world had to go through Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a mamutza. But there are two ways you go through a mamutza. And that's going to be the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu giving over the first four Chumashim and Moshe Rabbeinu giving over Chumash Dvarim. And das ist der Chiluk zwischen der ersten vier Svarim und nicht Torah. This is the difference between the first four Chumashim and Chumash Dvarim. In the ersten vier Svarim is Moshe ben Hamutza b'derech Maiver. In the first four Svarim, it went through Moshe. Because if it wouldn't go through Moshe, it couldn't come down to this world. The Torah is beyond this world. It had to go through Moshe because, as we said before, he's the one in between. But the Torah went through him b'derech Maiver, which means just pass through. It didn't become part of his seichel. Or then in Loshen for Rashi, Nasa Shliach, Rashi says a Loshen, Rabbi brings here from Megillah, that he became the Shliach, which means the Shliach is just a messenger. In other words, you want to send something there, so you give it to the messenger. The messenger doesn't change it, doesn't become part of the messenger. It's not his. He's just the delivery guy. Same thing, Moshe Rabbeinu. He delivered the Torah. It went through him, but it had to go through him because there must be a delivery. Like we said before, something that's beyond can't come down. How does it come down? There's a gap in between. So you have the delivery. So Moshe Rabbeinu in the first four Svarim delivered it. The Torah of the first four Chumashim did not become absorbed and grasped in his seichel. In a neifim von islapshe that it became mislavish, means it gets dressed, put into his seichel, and then he gave over what he understood. He didn't become part of his seichel. Nor is eine geblieben in der Darge von Mipiak wurde. It was the same level as it was in the beginning. The words of Torah from the Eibishter went through Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu brought the words of the Eibishter to the Yidden. Again, Mishnah Torah, on the other hand, Mishnah Torah, it was also Ruach HaKedesh. Moshe didn't make up anything of his own. The words of Hashem that Hashem told Moshe, Mishnah Torah, went through Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu understood it, and it went, and then he gave over what his seichel is telling him. But they're the same thing. He didn't change anything. And the Farbet is that's why it's called on his own. Not that he actually said it on his own. It came out as if it's on his own because it came through the slapshot of the seichel. And that's the difference between the two svarim. So they're all from the Eibishter, and it's all the Eibishter's words. But the first ones we went from Moshe. He probably understood it, but didn't go through and became part of him, while the other one did become part of him. This explains why, even if you hold that in the first four Chumashim we don't dashen when two things are written next to each other. And as we said before, why? Because we can't know what the Eibishter had in mind when he put the Seder together. So we can't say it came from Smuchim. Nevertheless, in Chumash Dvarim, we do say why. Because the erste vier Svarim, the first four Chumashim, they didn't come because it was put and became part of the Seichel of Moshe Rabbeinu. He's Agama, the Seder Aksubim is is in Zeh B'tachos Hadiyuk. Even though the Seder is exact, there is exact, is aber a hechere Seder. There is a special Seder in the order. But in the first four Svarim, Sitna didn't go through Moshe. So the order is beyond. The order is not something that is shayches for the Nivroim, for the creatures, for the human beings to grasp. And the father is Leib Dorish Smuchim. So this opinion holds. We can't Dorish Smuchim. There is a Seder. Actually, it's interesting. The Shalah says, he quotes here the Shalah in her Order 31. The Shalah says that normally people think when it says Ein Mugdim Mucha B'Teira that there's no order in Teira, what comes first or later, means that the Teira is not written with an order. So the Shalah says the opposite. Ein Mugdim Mucha B'Teira means it's not written according to the Seder Hazmanim, according to the chronological order. So he says that fact that it's not written according to the chronological order is a raya there is a Seder. Because if there wouldn't be a different type of Seder, why would they change the order of the events? Why would the timeline be changed? Stam to not write things in the way order happened. If there's another reason for the Seder, then we say that overrides the order of the chronological order. So he says the fact that Ein Mugdim Mucha B'Teira shows there is a Seder, but it's a kind of Seder that we can't know. So the first verse for him that it didn't go through the Seichel of Moshe. When Moshe wrote it, it wasn't because he understood it that way. That's a Seder that we can't darshan according to this opinion. I think in the Mishnah Torah about Chumash Devorim, but the Akbar Hashem hat sich mislabish gewen. Misasagas Moshe by Chumash Devorim, when the words of Hashem were mislabish, were misached and united with Moshe Rabbeinu Seichel. He says the Seder Advorim v'aksuvim is gestaltet like Sagas Moshe and Devorim. The Mele, when the Seder is there, obviously there is an understanding that Moshe understood. It's not from the Eibishter. But the other first ones, maybe you can't understand, so we don't know, we can't darshan. But here, since it went through Moshe Seichel and Moshe wrote it, understanding it, so it's the same order the Eibishter wanted. But obviously, it's something that a human being could understand. But Mele, Dorish Smuchim. So here, we as human beings, we as people, could darshan Smuchim. But it's all based on this, that it is the Eibishter's say that everything is the Eibishter, but it went through that Moshe wrote it also understanding. Now, what we have to understand. Lomos Hashem kocha. Why did Hashem do this? As Mishnah Torah, these slapshes now talking for Moshe. Why did they wish to make it part of Torah, which means Chumash Devorim, should come down as part of Moshe's understanding? So much so that we could even call it by a zone, not a zone, but we could even call it. What's the purpose? What wouldn't it be better that every part of Torah would come down straight from David through Moshe, because we need a mamutza, but it should not be mislavish. Why is there a need for some part of Torah to come through the slapshes of Moshe? And b'meila we could even call it b'piatzmi omro, because it's misached with Moshe seichel. Why did David make that? Is the beer in them? The explanation is like this. B'shas ha'ashpoah bet nit mislavish in the mamutza. When the hashpoah is not mislavish, doesn't become united with the in middle. Leib so now be'emes, even though it goes through, it's like it was before, no change. So it's be'emes beyond the grasp of the receivers. Since we're talking about something which is beyond their grasp, and if it goes b'derech maiver, it goes through the first way, it doesn't get changed when it goes through the middle, so it remains beyond their understanding. Und der Linie von der Ashpoah was die Mekabel nehmen. So the Ashpoah that the receivers will get, und was wird nisatzim in Zeir HaSogi, and what they're going to grasp is a snit in the Erev from the Ashpoah. It's not really what the Ashpoah is. Since the Ashpoah essentially is beyond them, completely beyond. That's the reason why we need the middle, because it's beyond. And when it goes through the middle, it's able to come down, but it doesn't change in the first way. If it doesn't change, so it's really still beyond their grasp. So even though they do grasp it, but not really. They don't really grasp the real thing, because the real thing remains beyond their asogit. So if all of Torah would go through Moshe Rabbeinu b'derech maiver, the Torah would all remain beyond the true grasp of the Makab of the Eden. Und der Rebbe, therefore, when Torah wollte Rabbi kommen lamata b'leis b'derech maiver durch Moshe, if Torah would come down here, going through Moshe, but just b'derech maiver, just passing through, wollten Eden mit zeire klei asogit, die kennt matzig an der Metzema Torah. So Yidden, with their understanding, would never really grasp the essence of the Torah. The word nemen means to take, and he puts it in quotations, to take, to absorb. It should become one with them, the truth of the Torah, the Dvar Hashem, the way it's by the Eibishter. Because the way it's by the Eibishter is higher than Nasogya. And that didn't change. So as much as it came to them, so they got it. whole idea is we're saying it comes down through the Mamutza, so it comes down B'derech Ma'ivus, so now we got it. But what do we have? Whatever we could take. But the real thing we can't take, because the real thing is beyond, and that stayed beyond, even though it came through the Mamutza. What would the seichel of a human being grasp? It would be like a ray, a little bit of something of what the Eibishter said. But to take the essence, the depth of what the Eibishter said, we wouldn't be able to. This is the whole chiddush, the whole thing, why the Eibishter Mishnah Torah made. What does Mishnah Torah? Moshe Rabbeinu repeated to them the whole Torah. And now he repeated to them the Torah in Chumash Devorim, wie es ist nicht slavisch geworden in sein Klei HaSogya. Now he's telling him the whole Torah as it goes through his seichel. In other words, he grasped it. And that's why we call it mipiatzmei. Und noch, so now what happened? Now, when a Yid learns Torah, in welchem Matzav es soll nor sein, whatever situation a Yid is, let's skip the brackets a second, nehmt the Torah und wird nisatzem mit dvorai keish dvaravai mamish. Since Moshe Rabbeinu took the Torah into his seichel, and he was able to because he's the Mamutza, and now gives the Torah to us. It's the Eibishter's Torah. But the way already it was made that his seichel should grasp it, and he is on one hand also a nivra, so now he made that we are able to grasp the Torah the way the Torah is, the etzem and the Eibishter's Torah. So even though it was only done by Mishnah Torah, but B'Peil, he chazed over the whole Torah. So what he did was he caused that the whole Torah should be able to come into the seichel of a Yid, because now the whole Torah came also through the hislapshas in his seichel. And now anybody could take the Torah. And the Rebbe says anybody, meaning, I'm reading the brackets, I feel when there is nit Torah, because the Gemara says even if a person who's not Torah, who's Tomei, could learn Torah. Why? Because the Pasuk says that my words are like fire. Just like fire can become Tomei, Torah can become Tomei. And that means that every person could learn, not only could learn, could grasp the Torah. And what part of the Torah? The etzem of the Torah. Because it already became the Torah of the Eibishter, the way it is beyond the grasp of a human being, became part of the grasp of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's how we got it. So now we're able to grasp it. And since when he repeated the Torah, he repeated the whole Torah. So now when you learn the first four Chumashim, you also have that you could grasp it. Because through Mishnah Torah, he made it the whole Torah, because he chazed over the whole Torah, should have that madrege that you're able to grasp it. For a Moshe is the Mutzer, was his Mechaber Alit mit Nebishim. Now he goes back into the scene, and the Moshe is the Mamutzer. Moshe is the one that connects all the inyonim of the Eibishter, of the Yidden with the Eibishter. All the Yidden. Even as low as a Yid is. Where do we see it? One of the places where we find that Moshe Rabbeinu is the Mamutza, and all the hashpahs that the Eibishter gives to the world, any form or shape goes through Moshe, is from the case where the Yidden wanted meat. And Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Eibishter, what should I do? I only both. Where do I have meat? I don't have meat. And David Pasha brings this. Pasha, how could Moshe say that? Moshe didn't believe that Eibishter could do anything. So Chassidus says that's not what he meant. He meant since all the hashpahs go through me, I cannot lower myself to give meat. I can't lower myself to such a grubber, such a coarse thing as giving the people meat. What did David tell them? I'll give you 70 people, and your ruach will go on them. But it's still going to be a hemshech to you, and you will give the meat. That means that Moshe Rabbeinu is the mamutzer that connects everything to from Eden to the Eibishter. Even somebody is in a low madrege. And the meaning from Mayin Lebos, like it says in Chassidus concerning what Moshe said, where do I have meat from? So Chassidus says, as Moshe he can't mashpa sein der Ashpo from Bosser, he couldn't lower himself to give a meat that they wanted. Meat of karbonas, yes, but meat of just because they desired meat, he couldn't do it. Wie is der Eibishter hat ihm gesagt, Hashem said to him, Esfeli shivim ish v'zikni Yisrael, gathers 70 people from the elders, but saltim in the ruach asher alecha, and I will take off from the spirit of you and give it to them, and then you'll be able to be mashpia meat, which means eich di hashpoah, even this hashpoah, which is low, but the gewusst sein durch atzilus ruach shel Moshe, had to come because the Eibishter took from the spirit of Moshe Rabbeinu. Weil alle hashpoahs Eden kommen durch Moshe after. All the hashpoahs of Eden come through Moshe Rabbeinu. So since Moshe Rabbeinu is the mamutze, that all the hashpahs which are by the Eibishter, which are beyond this world, in order to come to this world, has to go through Moshe, Therefore, to them was Torah, it's in the Mamutza for Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, the Torah that was put into Moshe Rabbeinu, not just B'derech Maiver, just passing by, it came into B'derech Islapshus. In Allah Zayna Eser Hamas, the way the Rebbe puts it, Moshe Rabbeinu was 10 Hamas tall. The Torah came through Moshe Rabbeinu, every part of Moshe. That means the whole Moshe was part of this being a Mamutza. All 10 Hamas, even the lowest Hamas. The Mele, since it went through him to the lowest, that made that the Torah should be able to come to everybody, even at the simplest person, which is like the foot of Moshe Rabbeinu. They all got it. It all went through Moshe. And because it went through Moshe, it became his seichel. That made that Moshe was grasped it, and that's how he gave it to us, and now we're able to grasp that Etzem of Torah. Now the Rebbe asks, how could you after all have two opposites? A Torah was vert mislabish and seichel nivra. Torah which becomes part of the nivra. That's what the Eibishter wants. What's us to learn Torah and to grasp the Torah, because part of our seichel. Bizas nikras hashmei. It says that if a person really understands Torah, the Torah is called his. It's called in his name. See, one pasuk says Torah Hashem, and one pasuk says Torah say, his Torah. The Torah of a person. So the Gemara says yes, the Torah becomes part of the person. The person learns, becomes part of him. It's called in his name. When the Gemara says, yes, a Talmud Chacham could be meichel, could forgo on his covet, on his honor. How could he do that? It's not his honor. You're supposed to give him honor because he has Torah in it. But nevertheless, the Gemara says, because the Torah became his, so he's the balabos. He could forgo, he could be meichel on his honor. So we see on one hand, the Torah became part of him, and we say, no, nevertheless, at the same time it's his, but he's connecting to the Dvar Hashem the way it is, all the way in the top. How could that happen? He says, the far was Mishnah Torah nemtzich von Atzmus is Baruch was his hecher von his chalkes. It's because Mishnah Torah has a higher source within the Eibishter than the first four. And there's going to be a Chassidish Inyan. We're not going to go to explain all the Inyanim, to be masbid the Chassidish Inyanim, but we know that there are all kinds of Elam Eslamayla, and there are all kinds of Spheres, and one after the other. And there's Eirei Sof in all kinds of levels. And then you have the source of everything. This is Atzmus Yisbar, the Etzem of Deivishter. And different things are connected to different levels of which is connected to of a Lakus. Mishnah Torah is connected, comes, and it's felt in the Mishnah Torah. We don't feel it, but it's there. The Etzem of Deivishter. When we say the Etzem, it means beyond Eirei Sof, beyond the Eiris. You have the Eir, the light of Hashem, which is a Ha'ara, like we call it as a ray, and then you have the Etzem of the Eibishter. So this is connected to the Etzem. What's the difference? Eiris v'giluyim, afilu deiris achil yenim and v'gederis chalkas. Anything that falls in the category of Eirei Sof, it's called the Giluy of the Eibishter, which is a ray of the Eibishter. The greatest level of the ray is still, it has limitations to where it goes, how it goes. It has its chalkas, it's divided different ways. When the fire is, therefore, even if it comes from the highest level of Eirei Sof, for instance, the Torah, the other four svarim of the Torah come from a very high level of Ein Sof. But nevertheless, when it has to come down, it's limited to how it could come down. Or there's even is gar mit dem ganzen take. If it's a possibility to come down, it comes down all the way. If it comes down without his lapshus, it passes by, it'll be completely the way it is, which means beyond our getting it. Or the rest in the Ashina V'Yerida, or if it does go be slapshus, then it makes a change, which means it's not beyond of where it comes. It's taka beyond, we said before, Torah is beyond the world and everything, but nevertheless, it divides itself and connects itself to the levels the way it comes. And therefore, on one level, it could be like this, and one way it could be like this. That's what Eir is. Eir could shine, Eir could not shine. Only the Eibishter himself was his legamen and need together his chalkas v'shnoim. No changes, no divisions. In other words, it's beyond anything. So nothing is teifas mokim. Ken and zayin beidin yonim ke'echad. Both could be together. Mitzad Eiris, and again, I'm not explaining it because it's not for now, but Mitzad Eir, you can't say that makes no difference. This and that. No, each thing is teifas mokim. Each thing means something because Mitzad Eir, when it comes according to the level it comes. Mitzad the Etzem is beyond Welt, and beyond Welt, and also beyond Welt. You can't say, well, the higher level beyond the world is closer to Etzem, and the world is lower. If it would be that way for Eir, you say there are dargis. So, but by Tzad Etzem, there is, all these dargis don't mean anything. So you can't say that there is a contradiction between Welt, the world, and beyond the world. If it's a level that world means something, beyond the world is something, so that we have a good question. How could the two be together? So Mitzad Eir and Sof Taka would be a good question. But this comes from Etzem, so there could be both together. The Ashpoa kum to Rabbi Slapshus in Nivra. Yes, the Ashpoa of coming from Etzem of the Eibishter could come down and be mislavish, be united, be part of the Nivra. These as mezokt of the Mipiatzme, so much so that you could refer to that as if the Nivra, Moshe Rabbeinu himself said it. The asoge von a Nivra, it's understanding of the way a human being understands. And at the same time, really in essence, it's the word of Hashem the way it is in Lamaila. That's what happens by Mishnah Torah. We learn in Chassidus a lot that by Atzmus, by Etzem, is Neisa Hofchim, because you have two opposites. Why? Because when can't you have two opposites? Each side is something. And that something is different than the opposite. You can't have two opposites together. But with the Etzem of the Eibishter, there's no such thing. There could be two opposites. So you could have the Tvar Hashem and Ina Nivra. But it's only the Keich of the Etzem. And das ist der Chilik zwischen der ersten vier Svarim and Mishnah Torah. That's the difference between the first four Chomosher and Mishnah Torah and Devorim. The erste vier Svarim sind mit Piagbura. The first are with Piagbura, which means Taka comes from the Eibishter, we said. It's not, it's the Eibishter beyond Welt. There's no question about it. Und noch mehr, goes further with the Ramban schreibt, the Ramban writes, as is eine geschrieben geworden, wie a Shlishi HaMedaber. The way the Torah is written, like there's a third party talking. When it says, Lamosh in the Torah, und erzählt, as Vaidaber Hashem Moshe geht. In the Torah it says, Hashem spoke to Moshe. Who's saying these words? Obviously, it's a third person, third being. You have Hashem talks to Moshe. So it doesn't say, so who's saying that? If the Eibishter is saying it, it would say, Andi dibarti el Moshe. It's another party, so to speak, saying about the Eibishter speaking to Moshe. So what does that mean? Why was it written like that? Taich Chassidus. Chassidus says it means, Ados is Asmus HaMaisel, was is Hecher Hashem Havaya. It goes on the Etzem of the Eibishter. It says, Vaidaber Hashem Havaya el Moshe. Havaya is a certain level, godly level. So the higher level, beyond Havaya, is saying that Havaya spoke to Moshe. And the fire is Bekechet to Mechabas and Havaya mit Moshe. Since it's beyond Havaya and Moshe, that's why it's able to bring Havaya to Moshe. So that high level, which is Etzem, Staka Etzem, so it brings like Daber Havaya el Moshe. Von deswegen, it's still not the highest. Why? Those Gufe was evet ongerufen Shlishi HaMedaber, the fact that we say that there's a third party which is talking about these two, was is Mechaber Ditzvei, which combines the two Havaya mit Moshe. The fact that we tell him that he's third, trying to combine the two, that means that these two things are a Metzias. And normally you can combine it, comes this high Madrege and combines it. But the fact that we call it that this is another level which could combine the two, shows that even the top level, which combines the two, is still within the category of these two. Therefore, he looks at these two as opposites, but nevertheless, he could combine it. Mishnah Torah from a level which is even beyond this. You can't even call him Shlish HaMedaber, which means the higher level which is beyond the two. The far kennen und seinen do beide Ksovis. That's why even Mishnah Torah you actually have both extremes. The piatzmei for Moshe, as if he himself said it. It's mislabish in him as a nivra. Und zusammen mit Havaya, and still the words of Hashem, the words of Havaya. And we don't even make, so to speak, a fuss about it. Over there, in other parts of they will make a fuss. Oh, you see, this is combining the two. There's another party, so to speak, which is combining the two. And here we don't even say that because it's a level which is beyond anything. So there's no contradiction to begin with. Snakes and Hofchon could be two opposites. And therefore, mitzad, atzmas is better to have both. And that's the Maila of Chumash Devorim Mishnah Torah. But that made that even in the other parts of Chumash, we are also able to take the essence of the way it is in the Eibishter, and we're able to grasp it. Not to understand it, but when we take the Torah, we have the etzem of the Torah the way it is by the Eibishter. The Rinyan and all Mishnah Torah is Farandug Mosi Navita Sodom. What we said before by Mishnah Torah, the two opposites, we also find something similar in a person's service of Hashem. In the way from Tshuva, we find that by Tshuva. By Tshuva, we also find two opposites. The Tnuah von Tshuva comes from them about Tshuva Alein. When the person decides to do Tshuva, and he has this movement of doing Tshuva, comes from within the person. It doesn't come in Hashem, Maila. Why? How do you know that? Maybe. For him, bald das Feinchet is a given abgerissen from the Lekus Rachman Islam. Before he did Avere, he was torn away from Hashem. Because had he not been torn away, he'd never do the Avere. That means he's torn away from Hashem. So he disconnected himself. Kum tuis. In other words, if he disconnected himself from Hashem, so what's the pshat? Hashem is ma'ared him to do tshuva. I mean, some places it says different, but we're talking from one angle looking at it. It's not for now to explain it. That about tshuva, you can't say that if there came a shine milmaila, eir milmaila came on him. He's not a kela for the eir. He disconnected. He's no kela to accept an eir. So when he did decide to do tshuva, kum tuis, as I say this tshuva is not mitzad agilu eir milmaila, that the fact that he got awakened to do tshuva is not because of a revelation from above. So welchaner is not kela. He's not a vessel to receive because he's cut off. Or from sich allein, something from within him that decided him to do tshuva. So it's not milmaila. We have a rule. We know it says that every Yisayris a person has really comes from Hashem giving the Yisayris. So it's a contradiction. Or on one hand, we're saying it comes from within him, not Mamayla. Then we're saying it does come Mamayla. Is the reunion in them, the pshat is that the Keich of Tshuva is from Helam Atzma. So it says in Chassidus, it comes from the Atzma, it's called Helam, the hidden Etzem of the Eibishter. It comes, but you don't feel it. As the Tnuah von Tshuva is Keilu von dem Bal Tshuva mit Atzma. You don't feel that Gilim Mamayla. So therefore, the guy, the way he feels, he thinks it came from himself. Like by Moshe, by the Mishnah Torah mit Atzma. Mishnah Torah Ba'atzma, Moshe Rabbeinu gave it over. When Moshe Rabbeinu gave it over, it seemed as it, and he understood it and gave it over with a seichel. So it's Mipi Atzma, Moshe Rabbeinu gave it over. So did it come from Moshe Rabbeinu? It came from Moshe Rabbeinu himself, but in truth it didn't. Same thing about Tshuva. It looks like it comes from himself, but really it comes from Maila. And those say the Keshet, now this goes back to the beginning of the Sikha. He said that we have to say that the two inyanim in Chumash Devorim, the fact that the Moshe Rabbeinu spoke Techoche, which is rebuke, and the fact that he chazed over the whole Torah, are connected. They're one. That's why there are two opinions, which is Dike, but they're both Dike, because they're both one. Now we'll understand why. Now that we said that there is a similarity between Tshuva and this Adinyan of Mishnah Torah, just like by Mishnah Torah, you have both inyanim. It's the complete Dvar Havaya, the way it is, the highest level, but it came down also into the Nivra. And same thing with Tshuva, it comes from the Nivra, but it really comes from Maila. So now we'll understand the connection in the meaning of these two things, Divrei Tichocha and Hichzelem Kol HaTorah Kula, that it's rebuke words and it's Chazorah, review of the whole Torah. Divrei Tichocha, what does Divrei Tichocha mean? Rebuke, what's the purpose? It's Tachlis Am Dinyan from Tshuva. Divrei Tichocha means to bring Tshuva. When Aveda said Tshuva, had themselves Dinyan V'iloi Atzmei, was his doing Mishnah Torah Canal. And Tshuva has the same Nekuda as Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah has a Nekuda that it comes from a Maila, but it's nevertheless part of the Nivra. And that's what Tshuva is. And therefore, we asked in the beginning, where do we see that the teichan of these two things, that it's Divrei Techocha, and at the same time Chazor and the Whole Torah, they're really the same thing? Yes. The Chazor and the Whole Torah means that it brought down the Torah from the way it's in the highest level that we could take it, and combine the two. That's what Divrei Techocha is. Also combining the two with the union of Tshuva. We're moving at Kashevias, or Gedarv Zayin, der Ilu from Mishnah Torah, als Achone for the rest of the Knesset from Eden Etzisrael. Just like Mishnah Torah, the way we explained before, which was said right before the Eden went into Eretz Yisrael, because obviously, as an introduction, as a preparation for the Eden entering Eretz Yisrael, they had to have this concept of the Mishnah Torah, which, as we said before, means to be able to take the whole Torah as it is Lamaila and bring it down into the Nivra. Now we're in the same level. We are not at the point when we're getting ready, mamish preparing to go into Eretz Yisrael again, through Mashiach, which is very similar to the time when Moshe Rabbeinu said the Mishnah Torah. So now we have to have the same thing. We have to have something that will take the highest levels and bring it down. It should be nislabish in our seichel. And thus is the Gilui from Teres Achsidus, and Befrat Teres Chabad. This is why the revelation of Chassidus came before Mashiach, and certainly, especially the revelation of Chassidus Chabad was had demselben Teichen an Alvi Mishnah Torah. Chassidus Chlal, Chassidus Chabad Befrat has the same nekuda as Mishnah Torah. In Chassidus Chabad werden erklärt in Yonif und Avakusen an Neifun as Chabad von den Menschen so können verstehen. If you learn Chassidus Chabad, you get to understand godly things in a way that's explained that our seichel should be united with it, should understand it. Like it says in Tanya that when you understand something in your seichel, become united with it. There's no other two things in the world that become one, like a svara that's in a person's brain. So when you learn Chassidus and understand the Yom HaLakus, it becomes part of you, part of the Nivra. Only idach wird es durch dem nicht stanach has v'shalom, bleibt the Lakus. And at the same time, we don't say, well, you're watering it down and it's not godly anymore. It's the same Lakus the way it is be'etzem. And the keich of the roof is mitzadem asteres Chassidus the gilgut from Finis Yechidish of Torah. We said before, how does that happen? Because Mishnah Torah came from the etzem of Deibish in the highest level. So it says Chassidus also comes from the etzem of Torah. It's the etzem of Torah, which is just like a person has, every Yid has a neshama, and the neshama is made up of 5 parts. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. Yechida is the essence of the neshama. In Torah, we also have these 5. So the way the Rebbe explains in a different place, we have 4 ways of learning Torah. Pshat, Remes, Drush, Sod. That's connected. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya. And the Chassidus is the 5th, which is the Yechida of the whole thing. The Gereta Mol Barichas, as the Rebbe spoke, and that's the Kuntras in Yom Torah Chassidus. That's the etzem pnimis HaTorah, the etzem of the Torah and the etzem of the pnimis of Torah. The 5 Werte nishtanech when steht in slapshes and seichel anushi. That's why even when you understand the Inyan Elokus, it remains truthfully the same Elokus as it is beyond in the highest levels. Again, not explaining it now what it means. You got to learn a lot of Chassidus to understand this. This is why the connection between Chassidus and it says the Lashon that says in the story, in the letter that Baal Shem Tov wrote, that he went up to Maila and he saw Mashiach, and he asked Mashiach, when are you coming? So he said, when your well springs will go outside. What do we mean your well springs? We use the word Mayan, for Chassidus. Are there Mayan allein that are upcoming in Chutza? You could have a well, and you could have dripping from the well. And what we need to go to bring into the world, you have to bring the Mayan itself. Where can ufton in the chutza? Who could really have ashpoa in the chutza, means in the outside, which is like the veld, the real depth of the veld. Was the veld which has no connection to the well springs of pnimis HaTorah. He says dafke bekeach from the Mayan alein. It's only the Mayan. The Mayan represents the yechida, the etzem. So the etzem of Chassidus and the etzem of the Eibish is the one that gives that keach. The farid does the achonet tzukos. That's the preparation to Mashiach's coming. Because what's going to happen when Mashiach will come? This idea of the etzem of the Eibishter will be nizgala in the world. And therefore in Torah you'll also see it. As a preparation for that, you have to have that now too. Because then it'll be nizgala, what we say in the tefillas of Rosh and Kippur, the Yeda Kolpo Ke'ata Pa'altei, all the things that are done, the whole creation, we'll see that you created him. As Eider Chutza Shebachutza, the lower Shebalo, the outside of the outside, which is the Pol Alein, the thing that was created. The idea is, you say, looking at the creation, at the creature, not in truth that it's connected to the Eibush, the way it looks on its own. That's very low. But when Mashiach will come, then the pole will know that you made it, which means what's the you? Is meyuchat mit Neibishn. He'll see that everything in the world is connected, is one with Eibush. The far was ato atzmus is baruch ba'altei, because you did it, you were the etzem, you did it. So when Mashiach will come, this will be Nizgalet. That's why as achonah to that, they have to learn also learn Chassidus now, which is to show the Welt, that the way the Welt, and it has in it the etzem of the Eibishter, which is that the Seichel Anushi, when the person could understand it, which is similar to the way it was by before the when the Yisrael Mishnah Torah, that brought the Lakus, the Torah, the way it's in the highest level, down into the Seichel of Moshe Rabbeinu, which made it that should come in our Seichel. So we have in our Seichel, we have the etzem of the way the Torah is l'mayla. It's a deep sikh, especially the second half. The first part is also deep, but the slapshes and this, we just went through it, I have to say, very superficially. But, that's the first step, and then we go further. With the orders, and then we try to understand it deeper. Okay.